A senior U.S. official said this week that the United States is about to go into Venezuela, quote, for the American oil companies, end quote. Now, I don't know if that's the best messaging to try to sell the American people on a new war, especially as new polls show that 70% are opposed to military action in Venezuela. But like it or not, that train may have already left the station with a new terrorist designation this week, and Reuters now reporting that covert operations could begin in the coming days. So let's dive into what we know, starting with a CBS YouGov poll that just came out a couple days ago, conducted between 19 and 21 November, where they found that only 30% of those Americans polled favor military action in Venezuela, with 70% opposed. In fact, part of that has to do with people saying that this just has plain not been well explained as to what we're doing here in the first place, which we're going to spend a lot of time on in today's video. Only 24% of respondents said the Trump administration has explained our position on military action in Venezuela, with 75% saying that we have not. Now, breaking that down among partisan lines, I also think is pretty interesting here. I mean, this is kind of to be expected. We are generally seeing more Democratic opposition to, across the board, most of Trump's policies, so it wouldn't be out of line here. That's not surprising. But we have 97% of Democrats saying that Trump needs to provide more clarity on why exactly we're getting ready to go into or conduct strikes against Venezuela. But 86% of independents say the same. 86% is a pretty massive number. Again, we don't get on board together with a lot of things in this country anymore, it seems. And even 64% of Republicans saying we just need to understand better what exactly is the plan when it comes to Maduro and Venezuela. And if there's a little confusion out there, I get it. You're going to see the comments below this video. I'm certain people will stand by any number of different reasons why we, of course, have to go, or the primary reason we need to be making a move on Maduro. And my pushback that we've had here for a while is those reasons seem to shift. Early on, and kind of the most consistent one has been drugs. But as we've talked about before on this channel, if you really wanted to stop the flow of drugs coming into the United States, boats coming out of Venezuela don't even make a scratch in that number. Like if we completely shut down the drug trade from Venezuela, 100%, no more drugs ever left Venezuela, it wouldn't be a noticeable difference here in the U.S. So that doesn't make a lot of sense as the primary reason, which leaves open the door to a number of other theories here. Representative Salazar was on Fox Business just yesterday, where she said the reason that we're going into Venezuela, the primary reason here, is because it will be a field day for American oil companies. Here we go.
At the same time, a lot of Americans don't want actual U.S. participation in regime change in Venezuela. They would much prefer the Venezuelans to do it on their own. Do you think the pressure that Maduro has received will force him to leave on his own?
Oh, I think Maduro is not Fidel Castro. Maduro is not a brave boy. So now that he has understood that he's on that very nefarious list of the terrorist organization, that the airspace above Venezuela has been closed off and the commercial airlines from the United States are not flying, he's understanding that we're about to go in. He understands that he has been our enemy for the last 25 years. Venezuela, for those Americans who do not understand why we need to go in, basically for three reasons. You're in Fox Business. Venezuela, for the American oil companies, will be a field day because it will be more than $1 trillion in economic activity. American companies can go in and fix all the oil pipe, the whole oil rigs, and everything that has to do with the Venezuelan petroleum companies, or anything that has to do with oil and the derivatives.
I mean, there's a part of me that kind of appreciates the honesty, like just say it. If that's the reason, and then we can have the debate as to whether or not we actually think that's a good use of American taxpayer dollars and the lives of our sons and daughters that might be put in harm's way. I'd rather it that way than kind of, this shady line about different reasons and kind of making up rationales for going into war, even if I disagree with the reason. Let's at least have the real conversation there. Now, a couple notes here. To be fair, I was not able to find the entirety of that clip. So Representative Salazar did say there are three reasons. Now, she opened with oil. And personally, I just feel like that's probably not a good argument to make no matter what. Like if that's the 15th reason, then you stop at 14. Like trying to tell the American people that we're going into another country to take their oil, I just don't see as a winning proposition at all. But nonetheless, the point she led with, the point she started with and focused on was the oil companies. Now, we mentioned that there's been a change in terror designation recently. Some reporting here from the Associated Press, and we knew this was coming, so this was not a surprise. But on Monday, the United States designated the Cartel de los Soles, Cartel of the Suns, as a foreign terror organization. They say Washington's listing of the Cartel de los Soles would open the door to new forms of U.S. pressure on leftist Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. Venezuela's Foreign Affairs Ministry hit back at the move, saying, quote, Venezuela categorically, firmly, and absolutely rejects the new and ridiculous lie from the Secretary of the Department of State, Marco Rubio, who designates the alleged Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization to justify an illegitimate and illegal intervention against Venezuela. Now, the reason for that change has widely been viewed as just that. It opens up more possibilities for us to go after Maduro himself. The previous cartel that we were going after down there, Tren de Aragua, right? That's the one that we've heard a lot about in the news recently. They no doubt have had some connections to the Maduro regime, and to a degree, their operations have been facilitated by the Venezuelan government. But from the start, when we have claimed that Maduro is the head of a narco-terrorist trafficking organization, that organization has been the Cartel of the Suns. So what we've done is shifted from, kind of focusing on cartels that operate in Venezuela to the cartel that we say is actually run by Maduro himself. So you can see how all of a sudden that may put Maduro in the U.S. crosshairs directly. Now, the article went on to explain exactly who this group is. They say the Cartel of the Suns refers to the sun-like symbols that are emblazoned on the uniforms of members of the Venezuelan armed forces. Venezuelans began using the term in the 1990s to refer to members of the military who had become involved with the illicit drug trade near Venezuela's border with Colombia. While overseeing drug missions, they were supposed to infiltrate and disrupt. So straight up corruption. They say as corruption expanded across Venezuela, first under the late President Chavez and then under Maduro, the term's use expanded to implicate the highest ranking members of Venezuela's military, members of the police, and government officials. So more than most, this designation is a little bit squishy in the sense that the Cartel of the Suns is, in a sense, kind of a slang term to refer to the Maduro regime and the corruption within it that is associated with the drug trade. So I'm not sure if we really back this out, if we get a terrorism expert, especially focused in South America, or maybe a cartel expert. We should get some of those guys back on here soon. I'm not sure if they would necessarily refer to the Cartel of the Suns as a legitimate cartel as much as just like the naming of a group of people, if that makes sense. But either way, this designation has opened the door, or at least we're viewing it as opening the door for an increase in military operations or maybe covert operations against Maduro. Here in that same interview, we have Representative Salazar saying just that. Now that this regime has been designated, we can go in.
So starting at midnight tonight, Nicolas Maduro and his gang is officially a terrorist organization, and he is the head of a terrorist organization, which according to our United States laws puts him right in the crosshairs. We can take him out, we can extradite him, or we can go in and try to finish his regime. So good news for the Venezuelans who have been waiting for years to be liberated, and very good news for the American economy, which I'll explain to you why this is a number one goal for this administration from the economic standpoint.
Now, something I want to stress here is we have been saying that for a long time. You've seen a lot of U.S. officials from the president on down referring to Maduro as a terrorist, a narco-trafficking terrorist. That's just been a term that we've used. But now with the designation of Cartel of the Suns as a foreign terror organization, there's a little more stickiness to the use of that phrase. And you'll see Secretary Rubio, same thing. This goes back a couple weeks, however, kind of making the same case that, again, this is not a government in Venezuela that we're going after. It's a group of cartel trafficking terrorists.
response to Venezuela's government saying that it's doing a massive military mobilization in response to what they call a threat from the United States?
Yeah, they don't have a government. There's an illegitimate regime that's basically a narco-trafficking organization that's empowered itself. By the way, many of the countries represented here at the G7 don't recognize the Maduro regime as a legitimate government. So I don't generally respond to what they're saying. Suffice it to say that the problem we have is that the senior leader of that regime, of that illegitimate regime, is also indicted in the United States in the Southern District of New York on drug charges.
Now, personally, I feel like the arguments for military action in Venezuela are still pretty scattered. We haven't seen a real, again, from my perspective, a real cohesive explanation, coherent explanation that is likely to resonate with the American people. Again, going back to the CBS poll, if 70% of people are against this, my gut says that most people are saying, what on earth are we even talking about here in the first place? But there has been a little bit of pushback in Congress, not a lot, a little bit, mostly led by Senator Rand Paul. He continues to push that message of, if this is war, then declare war. Otherwise, what are we even doing here, guys?
I want to ask you, because of your position on Homeland Security, you may have some insight into the drug cartels. You are also on Senate Foreign Relations, and it is tomorrow that the Trump administration officially will designate the Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization. That's the cartel the Trump administration says is linked to Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. Secretary Hegseth says it gives the administration new tools. Nothing's on or off the table, he says, militarily. Legally, what changes tomorrow? What becomes possible?
I think by doing this, they're pretending as if we are at war. They're pretending as if they've gotten some imprimatur to do what they want. When you have war, the rules of engagement are lessened. So, for example, we normally don't shoot boats that we suspect of being drug dealers. In fact, if the Coast Guard tomorrow started shooting all vessels that are off of Miami or off of San Diego, about 1 in 4 of the vessels that they normally board doesn't have drugs. So it actually would be unlawful if the Coast Guard started blowing up boats. But for some reason, they say, oh, we're at war off the coast of Venezuela, and so it's a different rule of engagement. It's one of war. But, you know, Senator Kaine and I brought this up, and we said if it's war, let's declare it as war. Let's have this discussion. Is it war or not? And the administration refused that. They want to have it both ways. They want to say, oh, we can just say these people are terrorists or narco-terrorists, so we can blow them up. But it's extraordinary that when some of them survive, they pluck them out of the water. They don't prosecute them for drugs. They don't collect drugs. They don't tell us if they were armed or not. They just send them back to their country, most of the time not being Venezuela. They've sent one back to Colombia and one back to Ecuador, but nobody's making any pretense of even interviewing them to find out who's selling you the drugs. Maybe we could find out who the kingpins are if they're involved in the drug trade. Not a word. And I've been given zero, not one briefing, because I'm skeptical of what they're doing. They don't brief me or the General Senate at all. A few hand-selected people may have gotten a briefing, but I have not been invited to any briefings on Venezuela.
Now, of course, you can see how we are kind of moving into what could be considered a next phase here with the designation of the Cartel of the Suns as a foreign terror organization. We have the airspace shut down over Venezuela for a period of time, and of course, the movement of additional military assets, U.S. military assets, to the Caribbean. Reuters just a few days ago reported that the United States is poised to launch a new phase of Venezuela-related operations in the coming days, 4 U.S. officials told Reuters, as the Trump administration escalates pressure on President Nicolas Maduro's government. They say Reuters was not able to establish the exact timing or scope of the new operations, nor whether U.S. President Trump had made a final decision to act. 2 of the U.S. officials said covert operations would likely be the first part of the new action against Maduro, and 2 U.S. officials told Reuters the options under consideration included attempting to overthrow Maduro. Not a big shock that Reuters doesn't have the exact details on what the next phase of U.S. military operations here might be. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, in speaking to this a couple days ago, said that President Trump has been very happy with the result of the boat strikes and that we should expect those to continue. Here we go.
And the president has been very satisfied with the successful strikes against narco-terrorists and foreign terrorists that are illegally trafficking drugs towards the United States of America. He's not going to tolerate that, and you can expect to see those strikes continue.
But the big question here isn't, are we going to see more, hellfire strikes against boats in the Caribbean, but are we going to see some sort of action taken against Maduro? And something to keep in mind here is the weekend. When we're looking at timing, if we look back, or more specifically maybe when the markets are closed. So when we look back over some of Trump's most significant military action that he's taken, and this was a list I put together, so I might have missed one here, but I think you're going to see the theme either way. If we go back to 2017, he launched 59 Tomahawks against a Syrian airfield. That strike was carried out on a Friday. In 2020, when he killed the Iranian general Soleimani, that was on a Friday. In 2025, the first strike against the Houthis. Remember, there was a long gap after the last strike the Biden administration carried out and the first one carried out by Trump. So it's not like this was just a big picture. It was kind of a continuation of operations, but it wasn't expected. I guess I should say that was on a Friday. The Iran nuclear facilities hit on a Saturday. Now, the one exception here was the cartel boat strikes. The very first one occurred on a Wednesday. Personally, I put that in a little bit different category. That comes across more like a generic strike against Islamic State or Al-Qaeda in the Middle East than, striking into Syria, killing Soleimani, beginning strikes against the Houthis, and then, of course, the Iranian nuclear strikes. So I think, the smart money is if we're going to see some sort of significant U.S. military operation against Venezuela, look at the night before the markets are closed. That could be leading into the Thanksgiving weekend, right? So maybe Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday is probably a good bet, more than, a weekday where the markets are set to open up the next morning. Generally speaking, the move there is that we kind of have 24, 48 or more hours for things to calm down. The Iranian nuclear strikes are a great example. Or even the killing of Soleimani. Both of those, there was so much concern that this would spark immediately a broader regional or even global war. And if that were to happen on a Monday, the markets would probably tank on a Tuesday as they're waiting to find out what exactly is going to happen here. When you do it on a Friday or Saturday and the markets have a little bit of time to react and see that it is not the end of the world, there's not as much shakeup there. Now, you can argue whether that is the right approach or the wrong approach, but I think the trend here is that is probably the direction to look when considering Trump military actions here against Venezuela. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.